That's good. Okay, I took off my tie so I feel more American now. Praise the Lord. So if you want to go to the book of Joshua and chapter 9, I'm just going to quote a scripture as you go there in Hosea. It says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge, because thou hast rejected knowledge. I will also reject thee, that thou shalt be no priest to me, seeing thou hast forgotten the law of thy God. I will also forget thy children." And obviously that doesn't paint a pretty picture. But in the world, obviously that's what's happening, is people have forgotten God, and they've forgotten about the knowledge of God. We just heard from Pastor Steve that until he got some knowledge that he could relate to, that the Bible became something significant that he could work with. Actually, I was thinking when Bill was giving his testimony, what a wonderful title for a talk, Wonder Bread. Was that who you used to work for? Wonder Bread, what a wonderful title. Unfortunately, I didn't come up with that. So I've titled this, Knowledge Can Expel Fear. And I suppose if you don't have knowledge, you can be ignorant, or you can have, when you have a lack of knowledge, you can be ignorant. And that can cause problems in itself, that you don't make the right decisions because you don't have the knowledge you need. I was watching I have to admit, before I came to the Lord, I used to love mob movies. The Italian mafia and all that kind of stuff. I have a little bit of Italian going back, but I wasn't in the mob. I was watching this documentary on New York, and it was called The City of Fear, in the 70s and the 80s, because the mob ruled the Italian mafia, the five families. It's interesting, when you join the mob, that they used to take blood and burn a picture of a saint, obviously a Catholic saint, in the hand, and they'd now say you're born again, which I was like, whoa, hallelujah, we didn't have to go that born again route. And of course, if you betrayed them, death was hanging over you. But they really did they operated outside of the Constitution of the United States. And, they obviously, one was they ruled by fear, and two was they were actually very clever in how they took over businesses. They took over the construction industry. You couldn't build, most of the high towers in New York. If it's over 2 million, there was a 2% going to the mafia back then. They ran the unions, and it was very difficult for the FBI and the government to tackle it, and really the fundamental problem is they didn't have enough knowledge on it. They didn't have an idea how the operation ran. And it wasn't until they start, bugging each of the families very cleverly, how they did it, getting into houses of the mafia bosses, etc., that they started to gather intelligence, or they started to gather knowledge about how it operated, so that they could eventually, not because they had the laws at the time, but they just didn't have the knowledge of how these guys were operating. And it wasn't until they got the knowledge and a vision to take down the whole organization did they get rid of that influence, and did they get rid of that corrupt organization, so that they could, the people, to the Israelites, and because they've come from such a far distance, it's all now become moldy, and, it's been destroyed. So it's backing up the story here. And of course, the fatal mistake that Joshua and the Israelites make is that they don't actually ask God's knowledge about what's going on here. And when you go back to actually verse 3, you see, and when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done unto Jericho and to Ai, they did work wildly, and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks upon their asses and wine bottles, old and rent and bound up, and old shoes, etc., etc. So we can see that straight away, really what's happened here is the Israelites have been very naive. You know, up to this point, Joshua had been asking the Lord all along for his counsel and understanding his knowledge. You know, he used God for intelligence about how they were going to take the promised land and how they were going to take these different pieces of land. And all of a sudden, they allow their natural feelings to cloud the issue, and they stop looking for the knowledge of God just for this moment, and they're absolutely deceived, and they're locked into this alliance now that they have to keep their word. And without going to it, in 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11, it says, lest Satan should gain advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. It's interesting that the world is obsessed with devices, and those devices sometimes are not the key to the true knowledge. Even though there's a wad of information, there's an absolute ton of information, of course, on Google and all various different things. But some of it is just absolute rubbish, and some of it is very confusing. And for us, we have to be careful. It's just like, you know, if you were living back in New York and you see the mob coming up in their $3,000 suits, coming up to your house and thinking everything looks fine on the outside, but underneath, they'd rob your soul and anything else that went with it. So as we know, Satan sometimes can come in the form of an angel or an angel of light, and we need to be a wise people. And sometimes actually grown, what I notice is sometimes people that have come from the world into the fellowship and been born again are a little bit more aware of how the world operates. That can work to your advantage and your disadvantage. If we go to, I'll explain that in a sec. If you want to go to 1 Samuel, just to keep things moving, and we'll go to chapter 25. 1 Samuel chapter 25. I noticed, so sometimes it can be good, you know, in the fellowship. Not everybody that comes through the door is going to be a sheep. Some people are wolves, as we know, in sheep's clothing. Some people you have to deal with in life are sharks, and you need to know, you know, to be in tune with what the Spirit of God is saying, because we're asked to discern various different situations in our lives. And as I said, sometimes that can work to your advantage and disadvantage. Obviously, moving to Kerry from Dublin is very much a fast city. So you grow up and you're always thinking, when people are being nice, a lot of the time, my natural instinct and the cynic sometimes in me is wondering, where's the angle? Where are they coming from? Why are they being so nice? Now that can be sometimes advantageous in certain situations, but sometimes I noticed when I came down to the countryside, I still have that mentality a bit from the city. And I was dealing with Paddy's new landlord, and he's just a harmless country lad. And I had to it's like reprogramming my brain to stop thinking naturally that this guy is out to trick me. So you have to kind of work in both situations, you know, to look to the Lord, to be able to say, is this situation true? You know, I don't want to go into it blindly or naively. Now, of course, the Lord will always, you know, get us out of it, but he does want us to be a wise people. That's what Solomon's prayer, he said, you know, how can I teach these? This is such a wise people, Lord. Give me the wisdom to be able to ask the Lord for. Here's another situation. I'm going to read the whole thing for the sake of time, but in 1 Samuel chapter 25, verse 9, David's looking for some. He's looking for some provisions for his men. They've been traveling. David's a bit of a fugitive at this stage, and he sends to this guy according to all those words in the name of David, and ceased. And Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? And who is this son of Jesse? There be many servants nowadays that break away, every man from his master. And shall I take then my bread and my water and my flesh that I have killed for my shearers and give it to them whom I know not whence they be?" And of course, the lads go back to David. He's absolutely fuming because David's men had actually protected Nabal's men out in the land as they were traveling through. Back in those days, you would have had plenty of robbers, etc. So David had been a wall of protection. And David is absolutely wroth with this guy. He just wants to take this guy out. And we go to verse 36. Thankfully for Nabal, his wife had a bit more common sense, like in most households. And what happens is his wife Abigail goes to meet David. I'm not going to read what she says, but I'll just paraphrase it. What she says to David, she's effectively saying, "Relax, you're going to have a sure house," relating back to the promises that God had said to David. He says, "The soul of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord thy God. And the souls of thine enemies, then shall he sling out," referencing really back to the time that David had beaten Goliath. So David is really hot here and wants to take out Nabal, which wouldn't have been the right thing to do. He would have put blood on his hands. And this woman comes, Abigail, and she speaks to David. She speaks of the Lord's knowledge. All of them would have known in Israel who David was. But Nabal deliberately ignored the knowledge of God in David's life. And Abigail very clearly defines through what she says to him about the promises that God had made. And she knew about the knowledge of God. And we see the difference of this hard-hearted and this soft heart that's attracted to the knowledge of God. And what happens is in verse 36, Abigail comes to Nabal, and behold, he held a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk, and wherefore she told him nothing less or more unto the morning light. Very clever woman. But it came to pass in the morning, when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became a stone. And it came to pass about 10 days after that the Lord smote Nabal, and he died. And really, the contrast here is if you were to read the whole chapter, you will see the contrast between somebody that has a soft heart and is willing to take in the knowledge of God, and one that has a hard heart, because you can deal with people that are hard-headed. You can't do anything for people that are hard-hearted. You never want to become hard-hearted, because you just become proud and you reject the knowledge of God. Of where Abigail is soft-hearted, she cared for the knowledge of God, and she cools down David by reminding him of the promises and the knowledge of God. And really, the hard-hearted person, Nabal, his motive was selfishness. He was so self-centered. If he was an ice cream, he would have eaten himself. He loved himself that much. He would have eaten an ice cream. So there's a lesson there as well, again, about the knowledge of God. It softens our hearts. I remember years ago, there was a guy who came from a Pentecostal church. While I'm speaking, if you want to go to Acts chapter 3, and this guy came to our meeting back in Dublin years ago, came from the Pentecostal world. He really wanted to come in and teach us as opposed to listening. And I remember I met him a few years later. We were having a coffee somewhere, and I seen him, and he was behind a computer. And I just went over to say hello, and I asked him what was he writing about. And he said he was putting a book together about Bible prophecy of the Old Testament. I said, "Oh, that's interesting. And what are you going to talk about?" And as we went into it, I realized he had no idea of the fact, like most people in the world, that they think the Jews are just Israel. So he'd no knowledge of the fact of who the Israelites were. And when I came away later, I said to myself, I said, that's a scary position to go, because his church were probably, I can't remember which one, could have been the Assemblies of God. And originally they would have believed in the same message as us. And the fellowship is kind of built, obviously, on salvation, divine healing, and Bible prophecy. And if we're very sure of the salvation message, and I dare say to a degree the divine healing. But if we were to lose the prophecy stuff, we would actually go the same way as Pentecost, where they become blind and they lose the knowledge of God. So it is very important to remember that. And there's an interesting thing years ago, many years ago, in the ancient world, when Solomon and David, back 1000 BC, Israel made an alliance with Tyre and Zidon. You may know the story of how Hiram brings down the cedar wood to build a temple, etc., for Solomon. And the world of the Greeks labeled that empire the Phoenicians, who were really the Israelites. And they were very dominant on the seas, I dare say. They were like the Royal Britannia of the ancient world. And we in the West are very slighted towards Greek and Roman history. And the Greeks and the Romans weren't actually powerful armies on the seas. And they used to paint, if you ever see the old paintings of the Romans and the Greeks, you will see, because they had a lack of knowledge of the seas, they used to paint all these different types of sea monsters. That's why you get things like Jason and Aragot, is it? I think that's what it was called, and Methuselah and all that kind of stuff. Because when people don't have the knowledge, that place becomes very fearful, just like New York was in the 70s. And it was the same for a lot of empires, that they didn't really dominate the seas. Only the Phoenicians and later on the Carthaginians did. And they dominated the seas, and they had the knowledge of the seas, so much so that they would have made it across to America, I dare say, and South America. But that's for another day. And knowledge allows us to navigate places that we don't have to fear, because it takes away the fear. It stops the scariness when you become. It was a scary place for Pastor Steve, the fellowship, the Vogue, what was behind those doors in the old theatre, before he understood what the Bible was referring to, and that it was actually true, and he experienced it and he got the knowledge of it. In Acts chapter 3, hopefully you're already there, in verse 13. Why did I want to go there? Oh yeah, in verse 12, and when Peter saw it, he answered the people, "Ye men of Israel, why marvel ye at this?" So this is the healing of the lame man. "Or why look so earnestly on us, as though by our own power or holiness we had made this man to walk? The God of Abraham and Isaac, Jacob, the God of our fathers, had glorified his son Jesus, whom you delivered up and denied him in the presence of Pilate, when he was determined to let him go. But you denied the Holy One, the Just One, and desired a murderer to be granted. I just want to get down. And now, brethren, in verse 17, I wot not that through ignorance you did this, as did also our rulers. And that's not quite where I wanted to go. But anyway, the part I wanted to get to was the fact that the leaders of the day were absolutely amazed at Peter, because they'd taken knowledge that he'd been with Jesus, and all of a sudden now, this very different Peter is no longer an ignorant fisherman. He's now a child of God and is coming out with all this knowledge. It's a bit like if you ever hear Sandra Williams giving her testimony. She talks about that she knew Dennis before he came to the Lord, and the word went around Liverpool that Dennis had become dead intelligent because he came to the Lord. And that's what happens, is we become very different because we get this knowledge that we never had before. If you want to go to Acts chapter 17, and we can all relate to that, you know, again, in the testimony we heard, and we've people here as well, they didn't know where Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were in the Bible. And that's going to happen more and more because people are beginning to move further and further away from God. And we may not always be able to go down the traditional route of trying to witness to people. And Paul had the same problem, if you like, when he was going through, it hasn't changed. This is Paul when he comes to Mars Hill in verse 22. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and he said, "Ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. For as I passed by and behold your devotions, I found an altar with the inscription, To the unknown God. And whom therefore you ignorantly worship him, declare I unto you. God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is the Lord God of heaven, dwelleth not in the temples made with hands, neither is worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, seeing he giveth to all life and breath and all things, and had made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on the face of the earth, and had determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him and find him, though he be not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and have our beings, as certain of your own poets have said, for we are also of his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold, silver, or stone, graven by art or man's device. At the times of this ignorance, God winked at, but now commanded all men everywhere to repent. And, you know, that hasn't changed. That spiritually, most of the world are still in Mars. You know, there's no life on Mars naturally that I know of, even though people are trying to race there now at the moment to try and get there. But if you think of it spiritually, that's where most of the world is, because they have this ignorance about God. And we've been given the knowledge to be able, of course, to give this to people. So it hasn't changed. Sometimes people, you know, go about worshiping God, trying to come up with their own way. But with God, you know, God does not work in mysterious ways. There's a very set pattern of how God works. And we're pretty good, I think, in the fellowship with knowing that pattern. And we must never move from that, and to have the knowledge and to make people aware of the fact of what the knowledge of God is. Because, you know, if you don't have that knowledge in any situation, you have to think of what's going to be the cause and the effect down the line of not knowing that. That's what we're trying to do to the world and say, if you keep going that route, do you see the cause and the effect of what's going to happen as it came out in the gifts? This is the beginning of sorrows. This is not the end of it. This is the beginning. But as it gets darker out there, it'll be easier to see the light and the pattern, and those that have the knowledge. What is the hope that's in us, as people will see? It's the same in the Dark Ages. That's what Europe went through. Why was it the Dark Ages? Because it was a closed Bible. The minute the Bible was opened, it became the age of enlightenment. People got knowledge, not just about spiritual things, but even in the natural. People start making discoveries about new lands, one of them being the United States. They rediscovered it. They rediscovered places like Australia, etc. So that's what it does when you move into areas of knowledge. It brings light. It dispels the fear that's out there. We're nearly there. Let's go to 1 Peter. It says not to be ignorant of the spiritual gifts. Sometimes you need to, I have to give myself a reminder of what's actually happening in the spiritual gifts, and not to forget the awesomeness of it. Wow, this is God speaking through his people. And the scriptures say not to be ignorant of that, because you can become complacent. Not saying we did, but just as the scriptures say. In 1 Peter chapter 2 and in verse 13, it says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether be king or as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. So, the world might think we're foolish, but in God's eyes, what we're doing is wisdom. And it's the opposite of foolishness to him. It's foolishness in the world when people don't, as it goes on to say in verse 17, honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. So we're meant to put to silence the ignorance of the foolish. And that's what we do. I think in the Amplified, it defines foolish people as empty-headed. Empty-headed. And sometimes, actually, I missed the scripture. I just want to go back, just for a sec, to Romans chapter 12, because this is a good scripture. Sorry, I know I'm jumping about a bit. But just that's after reminding me. Sometimes, with knowledge, you need to have headspace, because your head can be full of so much stuff. I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that. And you've so much information and so much things in life that your head can just be crammed with stuff. And sometimes you have to get rid of stuff. And in Romans 12 and verse 3, it says, for I say through the grace given unto me, to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God had dealt to every man the measure of faith. Now, without going to it, in Ephesians chapter 6, when it talks about the armor of God, it says to put on the helmet of salvation, because this is where the attacks come, is between your two ears. That's where the battle is going on before it sinks down to the heart. This is where the battle. And it says the problem to put on the helmet of salvation, to remind yourself that you are a child of God and you have access to this knowledge of God. And sometimes what happens is if you think of the Roman soldier when he had his helmet on, if you start to feel condemned, your head drops and the helmet falls off, as if you're not worthy of God's knowledge or wisdom. Oh, it's too much for me. I'm just no use. Condemnation. You're giving up your salvation by doing that. The helmet of salvation falls off. And then the other problem is sometimes we think within ourselves, just as this scripture says, that our knowledge is greater than God's, which is what the world has done. And your head becomes too proud that the hat falls back off the other way. So that's the problem, is we have this scenario where you can't be a helium head, but at the same time, you can't beat yourself up. So you have to just, keep in tune with the helmet of salvation and the knowledge of God. We're nearly there, honestly. And where am I going? Back to 1 Peter. I should have told you, sorry, if you want to go to 2 Peter, actually. 2 Peter. We're asked to ignore the former lusts and how the body used to work, or how our old ways used to work. And of course, that can creep up on us from time to time. In 2 Peter, in chapter 3 and in verse 18, second last scripture, it says, "But now grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." So there's a growth that has to happen. We have to be open. You can never be in the Lord and say, "That's it. That's it. I have it all now. I have it all boxed off. I know it all." It's just never going to get to that stage. And even when the Lord comes back, we'll see that we've only scratched the surface. But in the meantime, we have to continue to grow in the knowledge of God. You should, and if you're not thirsty or hungry to know the things of God, if you think about it, I'm sure you had a favorite subject when you were in school. If you want to go to the last scripture, Proverbs chapter 16, I'm sure you had a favorite subject in school. We heard already, it's obviously numbers for Pastor Steve Alassi, because that's how Bible numerics meant something to him, because he's used to taking in lots of dosh. He's an accountant. I can relate to him. And but we all had favorite subjects, and that's the thing about the kingdom of God. You can learn the skills and the knowledge of music for the Lord. You can, history. I love history, geography, just people skills, you name it. There's everything in there for us to take a piece of. But I'll finish here. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 20. To remind myself what this was. Oh, yeah. So this kind of summarizes it up, because God has fully equipped you. We've all got the same measure of the Spirit of God. So we can't say, that we don't have access to the tools. You can't blame the tools. What it is it's just down to our attitude and wanting to have a heart and a mind that wants to grow in the things of the Lord. And it says, the wise in heart, verse 20, he that handleth a matter wisely, or wisely heeds the word in my margin, shall find good. And whoso trusted in the Lord, happy is he. The wise in heart shall be called prudent, and the sweetness of the lips increaseth learning. Understanding is a wellspring of life unto him that had it, but the instruction of fools is folly. The heart of the wise teacheth his mouth, and addeth learning to his lips. And pleasant words are as a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and health to the bones. And just that summarizes everything up. It's a beautiful passage of scripture. You could probably spend another 40 minutes going on that alone. But just, that's a good one to look at for homework. If you can master to handle the matters wisely. And a lot of it's down to just tuning in to the knowledge of God, starting off with the city of fear in New York, and how they tuned into the information and how they were able to take away fear by knowledge, and that we can grow in grace with God's grace and his knowledge. And I'll leave it there. Amen.